You're listening to a 3CR podcast created in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.
We are again, 21st of August 2025 in the Judeo-Christian calendar. Obviously, there are many other calendars. Now, big week, big 2 weeks, lots of things happening. Not just things that I'm involved in, but other things. First of all, I'd like to remind people that tonight at the Footscray Hotel at 48 Hopkins Street in Footscray, I will be doing a presentation on Edward Denny Day. Pioneer. Who was Edward Denny Day? What his involvement in what court case in 1838 changed the course of Australian history? Well, come along tonight. That's Wednesday, the 21st of August, and you'll find out who Edward Denny Day was and his pivotal role in the significant 1838 court case in the Sydney Supreme Court. So that's tonight. Now, the 28th of May will be the dinner down at Frankston at La Porchetta, 6:30pm start. That's the 28th of May. So those of you in that part of the city, we'll see you down there. And while I'm talking about Frankston, I'd like to thank those 987 people in the seat of Flinders who gave me, or the policies I was actually elucidating, support by putting the number 1 in the box next to my name in the electorate of Flinders. So thank you, you 987 people who shall remain anonymous, as it was a secret ballot. Now, Reconciliation Week is from the 27th of May to the 3rd of June. I'd like you to put down the Mabo Day commemoration on the 3rd of June, which is organised by the Ellen Jose Memorial Foundation, midday at Federation Square, next to the First Nations flags at the corner of Flinders Street and St Kilda Road. Come and join us. Half-hour ceremony, about a half-hour ceremony, midday sharp. That's Tuesday, the 3rd of June. And in case you're in Bayside this Saturday, come along to the flag-raising ceremony for Reconciliation Week at the Bayside Corporate Centre in Beaumaris, 9:30am start, where the Ellen Jose Memorial Foundation will be giving out bursaries to young primary school and high school students who are involved in the Reconciliation Through Their Eyes art program. So lots of things happening, and obviously there's lots of other things happening around the country and in your part of the world. The important thing is, don't sit at home like a wallflower thinking that things are going to come to you. But the only thing that'll come to you are bills and family members who've got problems. So if you want to get away from that, get out there, get involved in things. It doesn't really matter what it is. Even going to your local bingo hall gets you away from that horrible computer. So the sacred cows have come in. They're all excited. They are really excited this week. They said, Joe, you think the Judeo-Christian calendar is important. Think about the Hindu calendar. It's over 5,000 years old. The community radio satellite is upon it. We've blasted off. Welcome to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia, courtesy of the Community Radio Network. This program is coming to you from the studios of 3CR in Melbourne. The program is podcast. You can access the podcast by going to 3cr.org.au. And if you are a night owl, you can listen to the program at 5am on Friday morning. Well, you really wouldn't be a night owl, would you? You'd be a morning owl. But owls don't go out in the morning, so I don't know. You'd be a bird. Now, what's anarchy all about? Anarchos without rulers. It's not about rules. You'd be amazed how many rules there are in anarchist societies, but these are rules which are made on the principles of equal decision-making power and equal access to society's wealth. Because what gives rulers the ability to determine the lives of hundreds of millions, if not billions of people? Inequalities in power and wealth. So the anarchist struggle is the struggle to share power, the struggle to hold wealth in common and use it for the common good. Motherhood statements, ideas that people have been struggling for thousands of years. Sometimes we're successful, other times we're not. Whether we're successful or not is not our main goal. Our main goal is to be involved in that struggle to devolve power and share wealth with all of us. Let's move on. A field of rubble littered with the bodies of women and children, and in the next few days, littered with the bodies of thousands of babies. That's Palestine. That's Gaza, as you and I speak. That is Gaza. What is occurring is monstrous. It's unforgivable. It's genocide in the 21st century. Using food, water and medicine as a bargaining power. It's just extraordinary. But what's more extraordinary? Look, there are war criminals everywhere. And obviously the war criminals, which masquerade as the Israeli government currently, are carrying out this bloody revenge on a people they dispossessed over 80 years ago. But what I find extraordinary is the lack of action by so-called civilised people, civilised governments around the world. Let's not forget that the State of Israel is a parliamentary democracy. Let's not forget that the people who are involved in this carnage, the heroes and heroines of the Israeli Defence Forces, following their government's orders, are creating a situation which will have ramifications for generations to come. The Israeli Defence Forces, or armed forces, whatever you like to call them, have become the best recruitment agency for Hamas. Because what is happening in Gaza is not only unthinkable, it is not only a crime against humanity, it highlights the fact that as human beings we haven't moved very far away from the horizons of barbarism, because this is barbarism in its worst elements. But what I find more disturbing is the lack of action. Not by people who protest around the world, ordinary people doing what they can, but the lack of action by governments which continue to sit on their hands. When you look at, it's just extraordinary. Our government could do something today. The Australian government, the Australian Labor Party, which is an extraordinarily large majority in the House of Representatives, and a working majority with the assistance of the Greens in the Senate, can expel the Israeli ambassador today, with the proviso that they can't come back until there is a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. They could expel the Israeli ambassador today. They could call in the Israeli ambassador for a dressing down. They could close down the Israeli embassy. They could stop trading with Israel. They could stop providing military assistance to Israel. They could stop being apologists for the Israeli government's actions. Israel is supposed to be a civilised, a democratic society. But what they are doing in Gaza has forever destroyed any support that they have generated over decades. I'm powerless to stop what's happening there. You're powerless to stop what's happening there. But our governments aren't powerless. They can act today, but they sit on their hands. They cry regarding Ukraine. That's understandable. Russia and Belarus are banned from the Olympics. They're banned from Eurovision. Talking about Eurovision, what a farce. What a farce. We see the Israeli Secret Service manipulating the Eurovision vote to give the Israeli contestant the highest public vote. Extraordinary. And what's extraordinary is Israel is still part of the Olympic movement. It's still part of Eurovision. What do they have to do in order to be expelled? When we have a United Nations, the head of the United Nations Relief Agency in Gaza, which has been banned by the Israeli authorities, saying that 12,000 babies in Gaza, not children, babies, will die in the next 48 hours because of lack of essential food. When we talk about 60,000 people, mainly 70% women and children, being blown to bits by one of the most sophisticated military machines on planet Earth. When we see an enclave of 40 kilometres by 8 kilometres wide being bombed back into the Dark Ages, when we see people being denied the basic necessities of life because an organisation amongst their midst was responsible for the murder of 1,200 Israelis on the 7th of October almost 1.5 years ago. Extraordinary. But what's extraordinary is how little action is being taken. There's nothing to stop the Great Britain or France or any other Western country sending a warship to Gaza. Let's see the Israeli Defence Forces blow up a warship from another country and provide aid to the besieged inhabitants. Maybe the new Pope could arrive at the border between Egypt and Gaza and do something, because I can't do anything. I can talk about it. I can highlight to people what's happening is there is just totally unacceptable. If I did what the Israeli government, and it is their government, a legally elected government in a parliamentary democracy, doing to the Palestinians in Gaza, if I did that to a cat or a dog, I would be enemy number one in this country. I laugh when people say, I had trouble getting on the internet last night, or we had a 2-hour power failure, and we bitch about this and we bitch about that. The reality is that what's happening in Gaza to the Palestinians in Gaza makes any problem that we are faced with pale into significance. This is an example of collective punishment, ethnic cleansing, genocide. When the head of the United Nations Relief Agency in Gaza tells me and the world today on the 21st of August 2025 that 12,000 Palestinian babies will die because of the lack of food, because of the blockade, the total blockade of aid to Gaza, you begin to realise the extent of the atrocities and the carnage. Gaza is nothing more than a field of rubble littered with the bodies of women and children. So what's the acceptable ratio for collateral damage? One Hamas militant for 100 Palestinian civilians? Is that an acceptable ratio? 12,000 babies dying within 48 hours? Is that an acceptable collateral damage? The world's most sophisticated armaments being used to bomb people in tents, to destroy their hospitals, their centres of religious worship, their schools, their homes. Is that totally acceptable in the first quarter of a century, first quarter of the 21st century? Is there really any difference between us and the slaughters which occurred in medieval Europe, medieval Asia? Is there really any difference? You listen to The Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia by the Community Radio Network. The important thing is you do have a mouth. You can talk to the people around you. You can put pressure on your government. At the very least, the Israeli ambassador should be expelled today. Let's move on. Are you feeling powerless? There's nothing like this type of thing that makes people feel powerless. There's no point. You can't fight City Hall. You can't change anything. I mean, this is the aphrodisiac of the ruling classes, that 1% that own the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication, to make you feel powerless. To think that democracy is the act of casting a ballot every 3 years and then you wait on your haunches to see how many of the promises are kept and how many aren't kept. Well, that's got nothing to do with democracy. Democracy is rule of the people, by the people, for the people, by an engaged public. And that's the key. By an engaged public. A public which leaves politics to the politicians, which leaves politics to the elected representatives, basically gets the government they deserve. A government which is manipulated by the 1% that own the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication. That's the reality. So feeling powerless is how they want you to feel. It's how those who exercise authority want you to feel. Leave it to the experts. What do you know? What do I know? We're just fools. We may be fools. They may think we're fools. They may think we're morons. But ultimately, it's people like us which make a difference. And that's the thing you need to remember. You may be denigrated, marginalised, ostracised, pushed apart, pushed aside, ignored. But the reality is, it's those who take action, those who refuse to accept that democracy is the act of casting a ballot every 3 to 4 years to elect representatives to make decisions for us, who find themselves in a position where they can't make decisions because wealth in this country is stuck to the hands of a minuscule minority. So you may feel powerless in terms of changing things in Gaza, but you're not powerless in terms of changing things where you live. You're not. I'm not powerless. You're not powerless. The fact is that we need to move away from that concept. We need to tear up our membership card of the somebody should do something about that tribe. That's a common Australian experience and a common worldwide experience. You see something and you think, oh, somebody should do something about that. Well, I'm too busy. I'm too busy to do anything. I've got financial problems. I'm studying. I'll wait till I retire. When you retire, you're too busy looking after your grandkids. There's never time. You create time. You have that ability to change the direction of society. And when 2 people get together, 3 people get together, 10 people get together, 100 people get together, their voices are raised to such an extent that society is forced to take them seriously. So if you're feeling powerless, you don't need to feel powerless. If you're a member of somebody should do something about that society, tear up your membership card. If you're a member of the gunner group, I'm going to do that and I'm going to do that, tear up your membership card and do something. You listen to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia by the Community Radio Network. Just talking to the people around you is a beginning. Just raising the issues which you feel are important is a beginning. Because without a beginning, there's no end. Let's move on. Danger, 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 danger. What's the major danger facing Australian society? Is it those horrible people in China, which we love to trade with? We like their money. Is it those horrible, horrible people in Russia? Is it those horrible, 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 horrible people in Israel? Are they the problem? What's the greatest danger facing Australia today? I know they're preparing us for war, I heard the former head of the army, I've forgotten his name, talk yesterday about his Vietnam experiences. And I can see, I'm old enough to remember the drum beats, how we had to fight the yellow hordes which are coming down through Vietnam, then Malaysia, and then they're going to attack Australia. I remember all the propaganda which was used to, reinforce the idea that we needed to conscript 19 and 20-year-olds and send them off to Vietnam to die in the Vietnamese killing fields to protect the country. And I can hear the drum beats of war where we're looking constantly to create new enemies. You can hear it. Because the thing is, you've got to create that desire to protect the country from invasion. And I think to myself, what's it all about? What's the biggest danger facing Australia today? Well, the biggest danger facing Australia today is entrenched economic inequality. Because entrenched economic inequality creates the conditions which sees the Trumps of the world prosper. Because now that we've got a government with a significant majority, and I'll talk about that in a minute, if they don't move to address the problem of entrenched economic inequality which has been created through 4 and almost 5 decades of privatisation, globalisation, corporatisation and deregulation, we will see the growth of fascist, authoritarian movements in this country. The same thing we are seeing growing day by day across Europe. Because entrenched economic inequality creates the conditions for change. And we are in a battle. Although we may not realise that we are at war. We're not at war with some other sovereign nation state, but we are at war with a system which reinforces entrenched economic inequality in our community. And what that system does is pit us against each other. And I see this every day, where we are looking for scapegoats. Maybe it's First Nations Australians. Maybe it's people wearing funny clothes, or what we consider to be funny clothes. Maybe it's that gay chap down the road, or the transsexual, you know. Who is it? The fact is, it's none of them. We find ourselves in this situation where almost 28 million people living on a continent can't even provide the basic necessities of life for a growing number of Australians who are faced with entrenched economic inequality, who see no other way out than supporting authoritarian fascist movements. We may be basking in the glory, in inverted commas, of an ALP victory. But what's the point of an extensive victory when you don't use that victory to tackle entrenched economic inequality because you're too frightened because the 1% that own the means of production, distribution and especially communication will use that power in order to create myths and lies about everyday reality. The reality is, it's not the investors which get the country moving, it's us, the people. We build the cities. We ensure the cogs keep moving. We provide the care. And people need to remember that.
You're listening to a 3CR podcast. 3CR is an independent community radio station based in Melbourne, Australia. We need your financial support to keep going. Go to www.3cr.org.au for more information and to donate online. Now stay tuned to hear the rest of your 3CR podcast.
Listen to The Anarchist World this week, broadcast across Australia by the Community Radio Network. Now, I know that we like to be number one. You know, as Australians, we like to be number one. You know, we like always to be number one. We punch about our weight in every sporting endeavour. Yep, number one. Cycling, well, we're nearly there. Football, well, which variety? Tennis, we get a number one, and we are cock-a-hoop, I should say. You know, golf, you name it, number one. Well, I have some fascinating news for you. We are number one. Australia is numero uno. We've beaten the Russians, and we've beaten the Chinese, and we've also beaten the United States of America. We have, in this country, the world's most incarcerated people in terms of percentage of population. And I'm talking about the 3% of Australians who make up over 40% of Australia's prisoners. First Nations Australians. Isn't it wonderful to know that we're number one in terms of incarcerating a minority? In terms of per head of population, we incarcerate more First Nations people than the Chinese incarcerate Uyghurs. We incarcerate more First Nations people than the Russians incarcerate political dissidents. Isn't that wonderful? It's good to be number one. What else can I say? And considering Reconciliation Week begins on the 27th of May and ends on the 3rd of June, and Reconciliation Week in this country is bookend by National Sorry Day, the 27th of May, and Mabo Day, the 3rd of June. And in case you've forgotten what these days are all about, the 27th of May is the day that the Australian government finally acknowledged that taking away First Nations children was not a good thing to do. And the 3rd of June marks the 3rd of June 1992, 32 years ago, when the High Court of Australia, in a narrow 4-3 decision, decided, and I know you're going to find this extraordinary, they decided that terra nullius, the legal fiction on which this country was established, was not right. And there were First Nations people who had rights to land in law because of their prior occupation of the land before it was taken over by the British monarchy. Extraordinary, isn't it? Isn't that extraordinary? So Reconciliation Week, there'll be lots of things happening. I suggest you contact your local council or your local Indigenous group, whether it's a recognised Aboriginal party, a RAP or not, is irrelevant. See what they've got organised for Reconciliation Week and maybe attend a few of these functions. Because although the referendum, the voice referendum, was defeated, the problem is still there. That gaping, gnawing, festering sore that exists in this country. And those of you who are interested in taking this a little bit further, I'll be doing a lecture tonight, or a presentation tonight, the Footscray Hotel at 48 Hopkins Street, 6:30pm for a 7pm start. We'll be looking at the role that Edward Denny Day played in a court case which changed the direction of this country. Once again, you listen to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. This program is podcast. You can access the podcast by going to 3cr.org.au, 3cr.org.au. My name is Joseph Toscano. You can leave messages on 0439 395 489. You can actually write to me at Post Office Box 20, Parkville 3052. I'm interested in many. These programs have been podcast for years. That's the Anarchist World This Week. You can access the podcast by going to 3cr.org.au, irrespective of where you're listening to this program across Australia, courtesy of the Community Radio Network, which have been broadcasting the Anarchist World This Week for at least 2 decades, while Community Radio 3CR in Melbourne has been broadcasting the Anarchist World This Week for almost 50 years. And people say, well, Joe, what have you achieved? Well, I don't know what I've achieved. You're the ones who are listening. You know how this program has changed your life. And that's what this is about. It's not about me, pontificating about things that'll never change. It's about me, hopefully, encouraging you to become involved in activities which will lead to change. People talk about all the reforms which were passed by the much maligned Whitlam-led Labor government, I think in a 4.5 year period. Things like introduction of universal health care system, Medicare, called Medibank in those days, which was the cornerstone of the ALP's victory this term. Things like, legal aid centres, community radio stations like the one I'm broadcasting from live right now. No-fault divorce, support for single mothers. No support for single mothers before the 1972. The end of conscription, and the list goes on and on. Why did that happen? Because there was a push from below. A push from below. People wanted change. Today, it's interesting. There is no push from below. I have never seen a more disillusioned public. Not disillusioned in terms of their maybe economic situation, but disillusioned in terms of their ability to initiate change. And it's programs like these which initiate that. We'll try. Doesn't mean we succeed, but we try to initiate change, to devolve power or share power and hold wealth in common and use it for the common good. Let's move on. Now, those of you who are regular listeners to the Anarchist World this week know that I broadcast this program from the studios of 3CR in Melbourne, which was established initially in 1976. And the Anarchist World this week initially called the Encounters with the Third Alternative, and after the fall of the Berlin Wall, I think it was in 1989, we changed our name to the Anarchist World this week, has been broadcasting from community radio station 3CR for at least 47 years, and via the community radio network for about 20 years. So, why can I say what I say? People listen, because this is a broadcast. It's not a podcast, it's a broadcast. I'm broadcasting across the country. I'm broadcasting worldwide via 3cr.org.au. Right? I am broadcasting. So it's a broadcast. I'm casting a broad net out in the community. Why can I say the things I say on this program? And there's only one reason. You won't hear a program like this in the corporate-owned media or the government guild at ABC. I'll give you a little example of what happens in the government guild at ABC. In 1999, quarter of a century ago, right? I was invited on an overnight program to come in once a month and do was it once a month or once a week? I think it was once a week. Do a little bit of a comedy take on the politics of the day. This is an early morning program, an overnighter, which obviously nobody listened to. This was during the Howard era. And for the first 3 months, I'd go in, have a chat to the presenter. Everything was good. Then knock on the door, not my door, the presenter's door. You need to have balance. When they talk about balance, they talk about Labor-Liberal balance, which isn't real balance because obviously there are ideas beyond that poll. All right? So, the National Party Senator for Victoria, Julian McGorran, he lived in the city, would get up in the morning, he'd walk across the park and join me about 2 o'clock, and we, broke bread for about 3 months. And then the big announcement came. The program had been finished. Not just our segment, but the whole program. The presenter who'd been presenting the program for over a decade was removed, and they got a new presenter who could talk about lint in people's belly button. Because we were making some progress in terms of radicalising the community. But that's what happens. And corporate-owned media? Well, I'll give you another example. You may find this hard to believe, but, corporate-owned media, There's a radio station called 3AW. It's dying these days. They rely on nursing home and hemorrhoid cream ointments and funeral ointments to survive. And about 7 or 8 years ago, I had a call, spoke to the station manager. He said, we need to extend our viewers, the way we're going, not making enough money. And he said, are you interested? I said, I was interested, and I was going to come in and do this session and that session. Guess what happened? 48 hours later, the station manager lost his job. So, the only reason I raise these two issues, they're historical, maybe of no interest to anybody except me, is the fact that 3CR and the Community Radio Network gives me the ability to talk about things that are important in terms of initiating change in the community. Now, Radio 3CR, from which I broadcast from, is independent. Nobody's tapped me on the shoulder in the last 47 years and told me what to say. Nobody's tapped me on the shoulder and said the program is going to be, banned because we don't like what you're saying. Because it's independent. Community Radio 3CR should be independent. Most community radio stations today in 2025 are not independent. They rely on government grants or philanthropic donations, and we know what happens when you rely on philanthropic donations. Look at the atrocities, the carnage which is occurring in the field of rubble littered with the bodies of women and children and babies in Gaza. When some entertainer gets up and says something about it, philanthropic donations to that organisation disappear, and that organisation then pulls them off the stand. We see it over and over again the last 18 months. It's just extraordinary. So we don't rely on philanthropic donations. We don't rely on commercials. We don't rely on corporate welfare or corporate donations. This program relies on you. 3CR has a radiothon every year, and that radiothon is designed to allow programs like The Anarchist World This Week to be broadcast on air every week, year after year, because we have financial independence. But without your support, there is no financial independence. Without your support, there is no Anarchist World This Week or like-minded programs. They're not there. So I am asking you, I'm not begging, I'm not imploring, I'm not giving away any gifts or prizes, but I'm asking you to donate to the 3CR Radiothon, which will be held. I'll do a special Radiothon show on the 11th of June, which is Wednesday the 11th of June. Now, obviously, listeners in the rest of Australia will get a normal Anarchist World This Week, which I will have to pre-record because I can't be at two places at once, because obviously they need to support their local community radio station. And if you are listening to a community radio station through the Anarchist World This Week as I speak, and you're at a loss for what to do, because your life's become pretty boring, maybe you're retired and you're sick and tired of the 157 channels on pay TV which tell you the same shit every day, or you're sick and tired of going down rabbit holes on the World Wide Web or being involved in noxious interactions with noxious people who've got really nothing to say, or you're sick of trolls, or you're sick of your situation, why don't you ring up your local community radio station listening to the Anarchist World This Week and offer them, become a volunteer, because volunteers are important. It's not just about the radiothon. If you can't donate money, why don't you volunteer to assist? Most community radio stations are happy to incorporate volunteers. 3CR incorporates volunteers through them having a representative on the board. This is through the listener-subscriber scheme. But let's get back to the radiothon. Look, I need to raise $20,000. No, that's my quota. $20,000. I call it the You're Dreaming Radiothon, okay? So on the 11th of June, I'm going to try to raise $20,000 to go towards 3CR. Now remember, I'm a volunteer. I've been coming here for 47 years, week in, week out, and if I'm away, I've pre-recorded a program. 47 years. So I'm not asking for much, and the beauty about not volunteering, the beauty about donating to the 3CR Radiothon is, for every dollar if you're a wage earner and you pay income tax, for every dollar above $2 you donate, you get a legal legitimate tax deduction. What else do you want? Donate to Community Radio 3CR and get a legal legitimate tax deduction. Now, if you can't get a legal legitimate tax deduction, you can always get that warm inner glow, knowing that a program like The Anarchist World This Week continues to be broadcast on the Community Radio 3CR. And if you're listening to this program anywhere across Australia, through your local community radio station, give them a ring, offer them a bit of support, give them a bit of positive feedback, because most of the community radio stations rely on volunteers. Let's move on. When is a separation not a separation? Now, sometimes you have to laugh. Liberal National. Now, I want to go through the parliamentary figures for you, just in case you're not sure what's going on. Now, we've had an election recently, and I joined the 1% club. That's right. There's 3 1%ers in Australia. There's the 1% that belong to, motorcycle gangs, which have got, some of them have got questionable methods of raising funds. They like to call themselves the 1%. And there's the 1% I talk ad nauseum about. That's the 1% that own the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication. And there's me. That's right. I'm a 1%er. I received 1% of the vote in Flinders. So, let's look at the election result. Now, I think the Labor Party got about 34.5% of the popular vote, and the Liberal National Party got about 30% of the popular vote. And that means another 35%. What's that? 34, let's say 35 and 30, that's 65, which means another 35% voted for a host of parties, including yours truly. Okay. Right. Now, what happened? Well, the Labor Party has a 93 seats in a 150-seat parliament. This is the House of Representatives. Okay? The Liberal Party has 28 seats. The Nationals have 15 seats. And there's a host of independents so what's that? 93 and 43 makes 136. So there's 14 other seats. One has gone to the Greens Party in Ryan in Brisbane. There's an independent in Hobart who's been re-elected. I think it's the 4th time. There's an independent who's been re-elected in Perth. I think it's Fred Chaney's daughter. I mean, Fred Chaney was the heart of the Liberal Party, but obviously there are no more any soft Liberals left in the Liberal Party. We'll talk about that later. There's an independent in Sydney who's retaken the seat. There's an independent in Indi in Victoria, regional Victoria. I think there's 7, possibly 8 Teal. And I think there's an independent, a former member of the National Party, Mr. G, who's been re-elected as an independent. So there's about 14. Now, the Liberal National Party have had a little bit of a disagreement. We call it a disagreement, okay? It's a little bit like this. You've got a partner who's got sleep apnea, so they tend to snore. And they won't use their CPAP machine because, they don't want to use a piggy mask. So you put down an ultimatum. I'll sleep in one room, you sleep in the other room. That way I can get some sleep, okay? Well, think of the Liberal National Party separation as a little bit like the analogy I've just drawn when, when you get a partnership where one partner's got sleep apnea and refuses to be treated, and you decide to sleep in separate rooms. Okay? Now, the Nationals have become the bête noire of Australian society. They have 15 seats, and they believe that they will hold these seats for eternity because somehow they think the regressive, reactionary policies they support is what regional Australia wants. Then you have the Liberal Party, which is trying to rediscover its heart. Now, unfortunately for the Liberal Party, most of the local branches have been taken over the Institute of Public Affairs or religious fundamentalist groups. And people like Fred Chaney were booted out years ago. So the Liberal Party is trying to reform itself to make it more acceptable to city people, make itself a bit more acceptable and presentable. They want to get rid of the country bumpkins who've been hampering them. Now, the National Party thinks it's going to be there forever, so they've decided to go out on their own. But the thing is that once the National Party is on a mission. It wants to gather all those votes which had gone to One Nation. Now, One Nation is on its way out as a political party. It looks like Mr Dutton's dalliance with Pauline Hanson has come to nothing. And the only person left representing One Nation in the federal parliament is Pauline Hanson in the Senate. So that strategy for the National Liberal Party to take away, to use One Nation support didn't work. So the National Party will be hell-bent on breaking any One Nation, the One Nation Party, as the Labor Party is hell-bent on destroying the Greens, because the Greens is the Labor Party's, nemesis, while One Nation is the National Party's nemesis. Now, I have a little strategy, and it's a strategy that has been used before in Indi, which is basically a rural conservative seat. Now, most of the people in One Nation electorates don't trust the Labor Party and they don't trust the Greens. But there is room for a strong local independent candidate. And we saw this in the electorate of Nichols 3 years ago, where the incumbent, who was re-elected with 65% of the vote because of the lacklustre opposition in the seat of Nichols, which takes in Shepparton in that particular area, right? And then you've got Richmond, which the National Party, had problems retaining, and there was a strong independent candidate. An independent candidate has been shown in Indi, which has now been, returned independent candidates for, 3, possibly 4 federal elections, can outmuscle the National Party. And that's the only way to outmuscle the National Party in parliamentary terms. So, this separation, not divorce, but separation of the Liberal National Party, is a temporary phenomenon, which is basically a strategic attempt by the Liberal Party to modernise itself, get rid of its more reactionary members, and for the National Party to soak up the Hansonites in its territory. So, if at a future date they're both successful, I am sure the National Party would be happy to put on a CPAP machine and rejoin the Liberal Party in the marital bed. You listen to the Anarchist World this week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. Once again, don't forget, Reconciliation Week, 27th of May to the 3rd of June. Now, last but not least, who benefits economically from the net zero transmission program? Or transition, not transmission, transition program. Who benefits? Well, it's interesting, isn't it? There's a lot of local resistance to some very, very positive innovations as far as renewable energy is concerned, especially in regional areas. And to a large degree, this is due to the fact that what we are doing is, in many regards, we are replicating the coal and gas industry, where centralised large corporations have become the main beneficiaries of that transition. And local people, not only not involved in the decision-making processes regarding that transmission, but are not benefiting from that transition. So if this problem is not addressed, it's quite likely that at the end of the renewable energy transition processes, what we will have is the same type of organisations that are centralised which run the system. So this is something that we should be taking very seriously. That resistance to renewable energy, especially in regional and country areas, is to a significant degree due to the fact that what we are seeing is the replication of the structures, the centralised structures, which allow corporations to dominate energy production. You've been listening to The Anarchist World this week, broadcast across Australia by the Community Radio Network. My name is Joseph Toscano. If you want to hear more, the program is podcast. You can listen to various podcasts by going to 3cr.org.au. I've got about 400 presentations, about 25 minutes long, on public interest before corporate interest. If you've got a few days, you can access that. If you're interested in radical Australian history, go to josephtoscano.num. What else? You can go to the Anarchist Media website. You can become a member of public interest before corporate interest. What a radical concept. Become a member of a political party or an activist group which actually wants to put the interests of the many before the interests of the few. Isn't that a bit radical? So they're a nice group of people. What's my position? I think I'm the registered officer, public interest before corporate interest. Look, there are a lot of things happening, not just what I promote here on the Anarchist World this week. Many things happening around the country. The important thing is to become involved. Tear up your membership card of the Gunner Tribe. Tear up your membership card of the Somebody Do Something About That Tribe. Stop feeling powerless and become more powerful in your own existence, but more importantly, in our efforts to transform this society into a society where wealth is held in common and used for the common good, and where power is shared, is devolved, possibly through direct democratic means. Keep listening to The Anarchist World this week on your local community radio station. And if you are a listener at 3CR in Melbourne, don't forget The Anarchist World this week, Radiothon on the 11th of June. I'm trying to raise $20,000. About what Gina Reinhardt earns in 1 minute. Thank you once again for listening to The Anarchist World this week on your local community radio station, courtesy of the Community Radio Network.
You've been listening to a 3CR podcast produced in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.